I let Liam name the segment today, Frank, and that's what he came up with.
Chilling. I kind of like slapping it around with Seravalli, but it's just me. I'm partial to that.
Well, it's on the list. Welcoming in Frank Seravalli, our NHL insider from Daily Faceoff, to the Sports Closet studio. Frank, before we get into Kane and all the other stuff, last night's win for the Oilers, they needed that one.
They really did, and I think what it did was take a lot of heat off. I think when you look at the skid that the Oilers were on, some alarm bells were beginning to be raised, and I think the tension and temperature was certainly rising because this team, on paper, this team, even analytically, you could say, had not been performing up to expectations, at least in terms of results. And a lot of the underlying numbers were there, and you've seen it through bits and stretches where this team looked really good, that they were really underachieving and frankly underwhelming. So you've had your top six guys that have really performed at their normal level. And the big question was, it seemed like the Oilers were kind of reverting to their old self, which was the Oilers are one of the best teams in the league when McDavid or Draisaitl is on the ice, and they've been one of the worst when they're off of it. They're not getting the juice. And I think it's not even just what are you getting from the rest of the team. They also weren't difficult to play against. And I think that was the big thing that really had stood out to the Oilers and their front office, which was, how can we be tougher to play against?
So, like, that losing streak, is it just a blip, or is there a chance that the front office maybe noticed some things that they're going to try to address over the next 3-4 months leading up to the deadline?
I think they certainly have their marching orders. I think that they're beginning to formulate, what that looks like, whether it's adding someone to the bottom six that provides a bit of an edge or a specialty like a penalty killer. And I think ideally at the end of the day, they'd like to add a bona fide center to this mix, maybe not now, but maybe a lot closer to March 3rd, where they're in a spot to be a lot more competitive than they have been to this point.
Evander Kane, we all saw the injury last night, obviously really concerning, but he put out a statement today saying, he's okay at least. Mikheyev suffered a similar injury. It was 3 months. Is that the timeline the Oilers are expecting here?
They're not really sure yet. They're waiting on more information from the doctors to see exactly what was repaired, the depth of the damage, so to speak, that it was indeed a deep skate cut. And they were concerned that, there was the potential for some ligaments to also be torn. And this can be a tricky thing to diagnose because even if the cut looks the same, it may not be the exact same sort of process to get back in the lineup. There's all sorts of things with nerves and feeling, numbness, all those types of things, blood circulation that really factor into an injury that's as gruesome as this one. And so it's going to be, I think, a little bit of time before the Oilers have an exact timeline that they can point to say, here's what we're expecting for Evander Kane.
The Carolina Hurricanes are in Florida tonight. An actual hurricane is coming through Florida or in that area. So Carolina got into Florida is what I'm getting at. But they play in Carolina against Edmonton tomorrow. Is that hurricane going to give any sort of an issue?
So the Hurricanes are very on brand for them, by the way. But they're not expecting any issues. If you've looked at the weather map and the weather forecast, it's actually kind of interesting that they just kind of beat the storm in there, but now they're planning to fly out at 11 p.m. tonight after the game, right in the teeth of it. So not exactly a flight that I would like to be on in terms of turbulence forecast, but the Hurricanes have a contingency in place as well. Not only do they have a plane ready to go in Fort Lauderdale, which is close to the rink, but they also have one 35 to 45 miles away waiting in Miami to also, if the weather situation is a little bit better there, to potentially avoid a bit of the storm, that's ready to go just in case to get them back to Raleigh in time for the game. I was thinking, looking at the forecast, do you wait? Because all of Thursday morning, it's pretty much clear and sunny from 8 or 10 a.m. on. Do you just fly day of game in and play the Oilers and certainly take some of that worry and fear out of it? But in this case, the Hurricanes at the moment are at least planning to fly through it.
All right, so it sounds like not a ton of legitimate concern for that game tomorrow night between the Oilers and the Hurricanes because of, again, the actual hurricane. It's all very confusing to say out
But
loud.
the thing for you to look at from a betting perspective, of course, is the Oilers are sitting there in Carolina already waiting tonight while the Carolina
Mhm.
Hurricanes are playing against Florida. So I always enjoy that type of setup where the road team is in the home team city before the home team is even there.
Yeah, that is interesting. I'd love to know some historical data. I know it's like impossible to get, but in situations like that, if there is any sort of an advantage. I mean, the Oilers last night, they were underdogs against Tampa Bay, and I thought they were going to get smoked. But as betting on the NHL goes, it's anyone can win on any given night. Before we let you go, Frank, I want to ask you about a couple other teams in the Pacific Division. The Calgary Flames lost their sixth straight game yesterday. Jonathan Huberdeau was injured in the loss as well. There's been some weird comments. I heard you on Barn Burner the other day talking about the Daryl taking a shit thing and how that maybe didn't go over well with Jonathan Huberdeau or in the Flames locker room. Is there trouble brewing here? Like, is this maybe starting to develop into more than just a 6-game losing streak?
I think I don't think there's trouble brewing. I think it's premature to say that.
Okay.
Um, Clearly, when a team has a skid that hits 6 games like the Flames have had, there are question marks. They're dealing with some things that they didn't have to deal with last year. Injuries on their back end. Now you have Huberdeau hurt. What a bizarre situation that was. The team saying he has an upper body injury, and yet he's spotted in a walking boot. I have more concern personally for the walking boot injury than the seemingly minor upper body issue that he was also dealing with concurrently. Um, but there's a lot to unpack here. Jacob Markstrom hasn't been very good. He has an 893 save percentage. 5-on-5, like what have they, have they struggled because of the injuries on defense? Is it the goaltending? Matt Larkin had a great breakdown today. Is it the 5-on-5 play? Probably the answer is none of those things, and it comes down to depth scoring. I mean, look at this list of scoring leaders here, and you have Jonathan Huberdeau way further down the list. You have Rasmus Anderson, who's had an impressive start to the season. You have Brett Ritchie with 5 points in 12 games, and not included on that list is Andrew Mangiapane. That guy scored a ton last year. Where's the production?
Yeah.
He got a new contract. He's really struggled. So I think it's been some of their depth scoring that's been a big issue as they are 18th in the league, as you can see here in goals for per game. And a team that for the start that they had, which was really kind of good record wise, they didn't look like they were firing on all cylinders. And now it's sort of coming back to bite them in the ass.
And the last team I want to check on in the Pacific is the Vancouver Canucks. Earlier this week or over the weekend, Jim Rutherford made some comments to Sportsnet 650 about the systems. And then what was Bruce's response? Something like, that's another one from my book. Like, for those two to be going back and forth in the media like that, it doesn't look from an outsider's perspective like it's a match at all in Vancouver.
It's never really looked like a match, and that's kind of why I'm surprised that it's lasted as long as it has. Think back to the way this all started, Tyler. Jim Rutherford gets installed as president of hockey ops, and he's already inherited Bruce Boudreau. Patrick Allvain, the guy that he hires as Canucks GM, inherits Bruce Boudreau and shows up to practice. And I'm told immediately was watching the first week and was like, what the hell is this? What are we doing? And so that was, I think, of concern then. Then there was that friction in the summer with, the extension or option year. Is he going to sign it? Is he not? He wants an extension. The team's not going to give it to him. And so there was some drama there. And then you've got this team on the ice that there's sort of drama off of it. Bo Horvat, 12 goals in 13 games. It's been insane. And you look at it and they're in a spot where he doesn't have a contract. They took care of JT Miller over the summer and left their captain sort of dangling in the wind. And I'm told there's been no conversation on the Horvat front between the Canucks and his camp for an extension for the captain. So they've had a really underwhelming start to the season. That goes without saying. And there's just so many red flags between the 4 goals against the game that they've been giving up to that 32nd ranked penalty kill, also biting them in the ass this season to start. It's exactly what did them in last year before Bruce Boudreau took over. And by December 4th, when that happened, their season was already swirling down the drain. interestingly enough, Tyler, in this case, Jim Rutherford is already seemingly turning an eye towards next season as well, talking about trying to trade their bigger contracts to clear up cap space and get future assets.
Okay, and the last area I want to hit on with you is Chris Neal's jersey retirement in Ottawa going to spark a string of enforcers having their names put to the rafters?
I don't think so. And we talked about this on Daily Faceoff Live today. And I mean, I guess Mike McKenna taking the player perspective and having played in Ottawa with Chris Neal, maybe that presents things in a different light. I don't get this at all. And I'm not trying to slag Chris Neal. Like, the point is, this is the ultimate honor for a player in his career to have your jersey taken out of circulation and to be hanging in the rafters forever. Chris Neal is really kind of the first of his kind as a role player, 1,026 games, all with the Ottawa Senators, to earn that distinction, not being a superstar on the ice. And I applaud Chris Neal for everything that he is as a player, maximizing his skill set, showing up every day, putting in the work, and also doing the work in the community. But this is not the Hall of Very Good. This is for the elite of the elite of the elite players, only a select few, handful in your franchise's history. And I'm sorry, Chris Neal just doesn't fit that bill for me.
Well, this feels like something like you could honor him in a different way that's not this prestigious. Like, I get he's like a fan favorite and things like that. He's one of the only 3 players, I think, in Sens history to play over 1,000 career games with the club or whatever. But like, have a, like what the Oilers did, have an Oilers Hall of Fame, have a Senators Hall of Fame where you can put Chris Neal in. But yeah, I agree. Retiring his number is a little bit wacky. Every week.
So, I mean, look at what the Oilers just did with that Hall of Fame, as you mentioned. Like,
Yeah.
Ryan Smith was a way more impactful player for the Edmonton Oilers, and yet his number is not retired, and no one would even really think to suggest that his number should be retired.
Yeah, exactly. It's a puzzling one. Dangerous Wade's in the chat says the Neal retirement is more about goodwill with the fans. Been a rough while for them, and maybe like you just feel the need to give your fans something to look forward to. But again,
I'll
you could
tell
do
you
that
what it
without
feels
retiring a
like
guy's number.
for a team that has struggled at the box office and has struggled to start this season. It feels like a cheap way to get a sellout.
Interesting. The only other question that's coming into the chat, Frank, people want you to rate my mustache. What do you think?
You have a mustache?
Damn it. All right, that's the end of the segment. See you, Frank.
It looks like you shouldn't be allowed near school zones.
Get to the wrap. Get him out of here. I'm done.